General quarters. All hands man your battle stations.
Welcome to WETSU, a Battleship New Jersey podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Spevak, CEO and Executive Director of the Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. This podcast is sponsored by ELEC 825, the labor employer cooperative of operating engineers local 825, whose skilled members were instrumental in last year's dry docking of the Battleship New Jersey. Today, honored to be joined by a distinguished naval officer, Commander Carne Livingston, United States Navy. Commander Livingston is a graduate of Washington State University and holds a master's degree from the U.S. Naval War College. Since earning his surface warfare officer qualification in May 2003, he has served with distinction across the fleet. His sea tours have taken him abroad on a range of ships from USS Essex, LHD-2, to the USS Ramage, DDG-61, USS Boxer, LHD-4, to serving as engineering officer on the USS Paul Hamilton, DDG-60, and later as executive officer of USS Portland, LPD-27, helping to guide the crew through the complex operations and readiness milestones. Commander Livingston has also brought his expertise ashore in key leadership roles, including as Assistant Surface Operations Officer with Carrier Strike Group 1, Exercise Planner for Carrier Strike Group 15, and Instructor of Seamanship and Navigation at the United States Naval Academy, entering the next generation of naval officers. In May of 2022, he assumed command of the pre-commissioning unit JOHN BASILONE, and on 9 November 2024, upon the ship's commissioning, assumed command of the USS JOHN BASILONE DDG-122. After a highly successful tour bringing the fleet's newest Arleigh Burke-class destroyer to life, Commander Livingston was relieved in January of 2025, and today he continues his service at the Pentagon as the OPNAV Surface Warfare Branch Weapons Head, OPNAV 96, shaping the future of the Navy's surface combat capabilities. Carne and his wife are proud parents of 3 boys who I had the privilege of meeting recently on their spring break trip to the visit to the battleship. Commander Carne Livingston, welcome to WETSU. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and it's always great to see you again.
Marshall, thanks. It's great to see you, and thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast with you today.
Absolutely. Let me start off where we start off with every interview, which is, why did you join the Navy?
Yeah, I've heard you ask that question a few times on the last couple interviews, and I started thinking through how am I going to answer that. And I think that the easiest way is growing up, my parents always encouraged service. Even if it was just do a little bit of time in service before moving on to the next thing in life. And so I knew that I would serve. It was just a matter of what branch. As a kid, I wanted to fly jets. I saw Top Gun as a kid, and that was my favorite movie.
That's a popular answer.
So I wanted to fly airplanes. As life went on, I realized my eyesight was not good enough. And then other factors like grades. I did not have the highest grades, so I wasn't going to be the person that selected aviation. But so I had an interest in service. And when it came time to go to college, I applied for both Air Force and Navy ROTC. I ended up doing the Navy ROTC program, and that's what brought me to the Navy.
Awesome. I mentioned the impressive list of ships that you've served on. So I want to ask you just a few questions about some of your favorites. First, what is your favorite class of ship to be assigned to?
That's a tough question because as you listed there, I've had 3 destroyers, 2 amphibious assault ships, LHDs, and an LPD as well. And there's been different bits of every single one that I've really enjoyed for different reasons. I think obviously I'd have to say JOHN BASILONE's been my favorite ship. So if I was just going off of that, I'd have to say a destroyer is my favorite.
What was your favorite department head tour?
By far, my job as first lieutenant on USS Boxer. I was in charge of a 110-person deck department. We deployed from San Diego over to 5th Fleet, so over to the Arabian Gulf area. Did an 8-month deployment out there with the Marines. Had a lot of fun with that tour.
Over in Bahrain?
Yeah, we had a couple port visits to Bahrain while we were there.
Yeah. Well, and I think I already know the answer because you kind of just alluded to it. But my next question was, what is your favorite ship? What has been your favorite ship to serve on?
Well, JOHN BASILONE's my favorite. Like I said, there's things I like, and there's fond memories of every single one. But I think just the kind of that unique opportunity to bring a ship to life and a crew really kind of sticks with you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to discussing that in just a few minutes. Over the course of this podcast, we've interviewed a handful of Naval Academy grads, but I don't think we've ever spoken to someone who's been an instructor at the Naval Academy. So I'm really interested to hear, what does an instructor of seamanship and navigation do at Annapolis?
Yeah, no, that's really one of the best shore duty jobs for a lieutenant coming off of their division officer tours, because you're working in an office, but you're teaching midshipmen how to drive ships. how to navigate, how to operate, and just all about ship operations. The U.S. Naval Academy has a training craft called a YP, or a Yard Patrol Craft, and it's about 108 foot long. It's got diesel engines and 2 propellers on it, so it's very, very maneuverable, compared to a large Navy ship. But we take them out there on the Severn River and down into the Chesapeake Bay, and teach midshipmen how to safely drive. And it's a lot of fun for us as lieutenants, because in a way it's almost like having command before we're in command, because we've got all
Right.
these midshipmen
Exactly.
that we're trying to teach and get the Yard Patrol Craft safely out in the op area and back. So that was part of the job there. But yeah, I taught seamanship, taught navigation, and a little bit of naval warfare.
Awesome. That's great. In January 2020, you joined the crew of USS Portland, LPD 27, as the ship's XO. Can you tell us about your XO tour and, especially how you and the crew navigated that during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question, Marshall. Like you said there, the COVID pandemic took a lot of the time on that tour. I checked into Portland in January 2020 as the third XO on board. The ship had been commissioned for almost 2 years by the time I checked in. I promoted to commander the week I turned over as XO. Had a great ship, great crew, had a really good working triad there. My command master chief was really solid. The captain I worked for, a guy named Captain Dwayne Sanders, he actually will be promoted to admiral this week. So if that says anything about the caliber of CO I had a chance to work for. But the tour started off great. The 3 of us meshed really well. We were very excited about it. We were going to be finishing out the workups for the ship and getting the ship ready for its first deployment. So very exciting, very, just an energetic time to be there. And probably about 2 months into that tour, we found out about this thing called COVID. And we spent the rest of our time managing that, managing how do you keep a crew healthy and safe while you're still trying to train and complete the mission that the ship was assigned. And we couldn't just shut the doors down, lock the doors and go away. We couldn't just keep everybody home. As much as the families wanted us to do that, and as much as the sailors wanted to do that, we still had to focus on training and readiness. We had to take the ship out to sea. The USS Portland was a test ship for a 150 kilowatt laser. So it was a test system that they installed just to test laser technology and how they could use directed energy. So we had a lot of underway periods where we were testing that. So doing all this while trying to keep the crew healthy was a big challenge.
Yep, I can only imagine how you all navigated that. I mean, it was an interesting time for me, and I can't imagine what it was for men and women in uniform across the world who literally had their whole deployments upended, their whole lives upended. It was certainly a time to be alive, that's for sure. One of the questions that I like to ask is, where were you and what were you doing when you got the news that you were getting a command of your own for the first time? And was that something that was always a personal goal of yours?
Yeah, there's probably 3 good questions in there to answer. And I'll answer it 3 different ways, because there was the time when I found out that I'd been screened for command, and then there was when I found out I got slated to JOHN BASILONE, and then the other part about did I ever want to command. I'll start with that one first. That kind of sets the scene for everything. So going back to my time in college and early career, I planned on doing 4 years, 5 years, transition to the Naval Reserve, and then move on to the civilian world and do something else, but kind of do the Navy as a reserve thing. When I got into my second tour, I started to I changed my mindset. I started approaching it as, I'll do 1 tour at a time. And as long as I enjoy it, I'll keep doing it. I'll do another one. I think it was during that second tour as an officer of the deck on deployment, and my CO put trust in me, as all COs have to trust their OODs. But it was the first time I really felt like, I think I could do this. Like there were some situations where I probably wasn't as comfortable, and he's like, you know what, Carne, you got a good handle on this. I'll be up in a few minutes. I was like, okay, he trusts what I'm doing, and I think that really just kind of instilled the love of ship driving, and just being underway on the ship at nighttime, being underway on the ship during a deployment. I started thinking, I think during that tour, you know what, if I keep doing this, that's what I want. I want to be a CO. That was kind of what started that thought in my mind, was back as a lieutenant JG, and then that carried on for the rest of the tours. It's not always a guarantee that you're going to command, though.
Sure.
So, you mentioned those tours I had, the department head tours, and then the 2 tours with the strike group. And the strike group tours were actually considered a float tours. They were sea tours.
Okay.
So yeah, carrier strike group 1, I was embarked on Carl Vinson.
Okay.
So we deployed, we worked on the carrier, and the only time we weren't on the carrier is when they had like the internet shut down and we had to go to a building on base. Strike Group 15, we worked out of a building, but we were the executive agent for training. We got underway with every strike group and amphibious ready group that was getting ready to deploy, and we ran the exercises. So it's a quasi shore duty, I guess. Your sea pay and your sea clock starts every time you go out for an exercise. But during those tours, just that desire to command really kind of solidified, and that led me up to my time as an XO. So as XO, I was going into my third look for command. So every surface warfare officer gets 3 looks. A few people pick it up on the first try, the first look. There's more often people get selected on the second look. On my second look, I got picked up for XO afloat. So I went to Portland, and then I had my third look for command, and that's where I found out I got selected for command at sea. And we were out doing an exercise in Southern California. I don't remember which exercise it was. It was one of the amphibious ones, probably Iron Fist or something like that. But it was one of the amphib exercises, and we were out there, and that was when the results came out that I'd screened for command. My CO actually didn't even find out before me. So I got a message from a friend that said, "Congrats." And I was like, okay, where's this list at? Yeah, sure enough, my name ended up on the list, and I was able to screen for command. Fast forward, that was in December of 18. No, I'm sorry. That was December 20. And then the summer of 21 is when I got slated. Every time an officer gets slated to command, they have a flag officer personally calls them and tells them what the assignment is. So I was out to sea again, and I got an email from Admiral Kilby. I worked for him at Strike Group 1, and
Okay.
he kind of became one of my mentors. At the time, he was the deputy fleet forces. He was a vice admiral at the time, and he sent me an email and said, "Call me." So I called him. He said, "Hey, Carne, congratulations. The slate's out. You've been slated to USS JOHN BASILONE." He told me, he said, "It's a pre-commissioning ship." He said, "So you'll go to Maine, and it's named after a Medal of Honor Marine." And I didn't know a lot about John Basilone at the time, but that was when my education about him started. That was a very exciting underway to find out that I was getting assigned to command the USS John Basilone.
And I'm assuming you didn't have much experience in any type of pre-commissioning unit beforehand. So what was it like, I guess, knowing that you're not going to, and you've spent quite a considerable amount of time at sea and during your career, and you've got your command, and now you're essentially going for the first couple of years to work at the shipyard. What was, how did you sort of navigate learning about the pre-commissioning end of things?
Yeah, actually, that part was, I was nervous about that part because, like you said, every ship I'd been on had been operational. Every ship I'd been on had been old except for Portland, and I had deployed with every single ship I'd been on. And when Admiral Kilby and I were talking about it, he says, "I've never done a pre-com. I've always been operational." I said, "Yeah, me too." He said, "But I've heard it's really cool. You get to shape the crew, you get to set the culture, and you get to establish what the life of that ship is going to be." As exciting as it sounded, it also, that's a big burden.
It's a daunting task, yeah.
If you don't get it right, some of that stuff sticks with the ship for a long time, and you really want to set it off on the right foot. So I was a little bit nervous at first on this task, but that was what the Navy assigned me to do. When I got there and started kind of learning, okay, what do I really do as a pre-com CO? And I learned pretty quick that my job really came down to assemble, organize, and train the crew. You get the crew assembled, get them organized in departments, divisions, and then train them for underway operations and eventually wartime operations. So when I got my head around that helped me really kind of understand where I fit in the mission and what the Basilone team needed to do.
As you just mentioned, DDG 122 is named after Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, USMC, recipient of the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions at Guadalcanal, and then being awarded the Navy Cross for actions at Iwo Jima, one of the most decorated Marines from all of World War II, and of course, one of our favorite sons here in New Jersey. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of having a someone of John Basilone's stature as your ship's namesake, and how that sort of resonated with your crew?
Yeah, well, having a hero like John Basilone definitely makes it easy to get behind and kind of rally behind the namesake. And, learning about who he was, reading about him, and trying to think, okay, how are we going to embody that? I think you remember when we did the commissioning, our battle flag, our call sign for the crew was selfless warriors. And as I was learning about JOHN BASILONE, that was really kind of like the thing that stuck out to me, was that, JOHN BASILONE was a selfless warrior. And so, we wanted to have a call sign or a name that resonated with us, but also helped kind of define who he was. And so that was the thing that we rallied behind.
Yeah. Can you take us through a little bit about you talked about how you kind of organized the crew when you came in, but can you take us through a little bit about what it takes to get a crew and a boat ready for commissioning, your sea trials and certifications? Can you talk a little bit about that process? We've actually had a similar conversation with our friend Steve Halley, who was the Plankowner CEO of the New Jersey, and we sort of heard about it from a submarine perspective. Can you talk us through a little bit about it from the surface force perspective?
Yeah, and it's interesting because for commissioning a new ship, up until the Navy takes custody and I take custody of the ship, I actually didn't have any responsibility or authority for the ship itself.
Right.
My authority was all with the crew. That's that was another new thing, but we had to start with building instructions. All the instructions that say how you operate and how you do business on the ship have to get written. Now we borrow those a lot from other ships, so you dust off, you find the one you like, and make sure all the names are updated in there so it has USS JOHN BASILONE, and then you review it for accuracy. You make sure that it captures the way you're supposed to do business, and then for me that it captures my intent on how I want the crew to operate. So there's I can't even tell you how many instructions it was. It's in the hundreds of instructions we had to produce and had to sign and get released. The other part is the training piece. We had to build the training program, qualification program, and get everybody qualified. So there was lots of schools. There were schools we had to go through. There was on-the-job experience we had to try to build, which we did a lot of that through partnerships with other ships on the waterfront, supporting ships in Norfolk, supporting ships down in Mayport, Florida. And we also spent a lot of time just on board our ship for the people that were in Maine, observing tests, observing inspections, and making sure we knew what we were getting out of our ship.
Did you have most of your crew with you in Bath, Maine, or did they sort of join in spurts or closer to commissioning, or how did you end up with your entire crew, and how many crew members serve on a DDG?
Yeah, that's okay. So the DDG, the crew complement for a DDG is about 310, 312 people if it's fully manned. Most of those people for most of my tour were in Norfolk. So the Navy has a couple pre-com detachments. They have one in San Diego and they have one in Norfolk. And if you're a Norfolk East Coast based ship or West Coast based ship, it determines where your detachment is. Since we were an East Coast ship, our detachment was in Norfolk. So when sailors get assigned, they would report to the detachment in Norfolk, and then eventually they would move up to Maine. The footprint, when I say footprint, the number of people in Maine is a pretty small group. It starts off with about 10 people, 10 to 15 people, and then it grows to about 30, and then it grows to about 60 or 70, and it sits at about that 60 or 70 number until that final surge of people near the end. So I'll walk through that process a little bit, because that's one of the unique things about pre-com. So understanding kind of the way that flow works, the purpose of the detachment is really where you get your fleet schools. So you go down to Norfolk, you've got office space with computers. So there's online training you can do, but there's only so much of that you can do. The best value we got was sending our sailors out to ships. So we would send them to schoolhouses that were in Norfolk, whether it was a firefighter trainer or an aircraft trainer. Some of the simulators, ship driving simulators or combat system simulators they have at the schoolhouses there. There's been a huge investment in the Navy and being able to train ashore, and then also just getting people out on ships. So, even though as a pre-com, I was going to end up with a fully manned crew, not every ship in the Navy has a fully manned crew. So there's always, USS, one of the other ships is getting ready to head out and they're short somebody. So they'll send a request out saying, hey, I need this type of sailor with this skill set. And, for most ships, they'll get told to send somebody. So what we did is we tried to fill those before we got told, because kind of the message I had from my crew was, look, in a year and a half, 2 years, when our ship gets delivered, we have to be able to operate the ship.
Yeah.
So you're going to get more value out of being out there on a ship, getting qualified, learning the job there, and then bring that skills back to JOHN BASILONE. And so we had folks that would go out for a week, 2 weeks, a month. We had a couple sailors that we sent on 6-month deployments. I had 2 of my officers that were out there on a ship in the Red Sea, when missiles started flying. And they came back with combat action ribbons. They also came back fully qualified. So all I had to do was requalify them on board JOHN BASILONE. And so for my sailors, what they did is they built their confidence, they built their competence, and then we were able to build the team together when we got everybody together. So that's really the focus for the people that are in Norfolk was training and just getting better at their job. And if we can support the fleet, that's a double win. Support that other ship at the same time, getting our crew ready to operate. The group that goes to Maine, like I said, is a smaller number. So our first batch of people showed up to Maine in February or March of 22. It was about 2 months before I got there. So we had a lieutenant who was the officer in charge up there. It was my chief engineer, John Smith. He was the senior guy with a couple chiefs and a couple petty officers. So what I told him was, this is actually even before I took command. I said, well, what I want you to do is start going on some of the assessments and inspections. As they get ready to close out tanks, you should go in there and take a look at the tanks to see what they look like. That way what right looks like. So when I got there in May, I think there was about 11 people. And then there was a couple of people that showed up the same week I did. So we had about 11 to 15 people that were there in Maine. And there is no junior people. So it was me, my command mast chief, and I had some chief petty officers. I had a damage control chief, an electrician chief, my top snipe, gas turbine senior chief. He was there. I had my senior Aegis fire controlman, and I had another chief fire controlman, Aegis type. So it was all the senior technical ratings, for the systems that are starting to get worked on during that time frame. Later that summer in 22, as the testing continued, we launched the ship about 2 weeks after I got there, put the ship in the water, and then christened the ship about a week after it was launched. The next big milestone was Aegis light off, where the combat system comes together and starts its test plan. And that test plan it takes most of a year. It's I think at the quickest, it would probably be like a 30 or 40 week test plan, but it usually takes a little bit longer. So I brought a few more sailors up. So there were still the senior people, but I started to bring in more like first class petty officers and second class petty officers that were specialists on those systems for the combat system. So the same thing when the test team was there hooking machines up and measuring readings from one end of the cable to the other, or when they were testing the equipment to make sure everything was working right. We tried to have our sailors there just to observe and learn all they could. So that felt like a long time, where we had about 30 to 60 people, and then that was probably about a year where we sat right about that number. And then we started looking towards, okay, well, pretty soon sea trials are going to happen. We need to bring sailors up for operating during sea trials, and then crew move aboard, which right before crew move aboard, you bring everybody up, and almost overwhelms the town with that many people. And we can talk about more of that phase too, because it's still pretty exciting. Because I think part of it, as you kicked off the question, was also talking about the sea trials and how that works. Yeah. So, so I was talking about combat systems light off and getting that system all ready. And then, we have to bring on the fuel and test the fuel system for the first time. And then they have to test the generator and do a generator light off, and then eventually a main engine light off. And these are all the support systems getting ready for
going down and checking all the boxes.
Exactly. And they do that for every system. Air conditioners. The first time we walked on board and we felt ventilation coming out, it was like, wow, that's a big deal. The ship it's starting to come to life. And so there's a series of 3 sea trials eventually. When everything is tested, everything works, they've tested at pier side, it's okay, let's go shake it down at sea. The builder, Bath Iron Works, actually runs the sea trials, and it's overseen by the supervisor of shipbuilding. So the supervisor of shipbuilding is the government rep, and it's a mix of uniform and civilians. The uniform folks there are usually engineering duty officers. Some of them were prior SWOs before they became engineering duty officers. So they are the supervisor, and I was really just there as a guest.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was neat being on my ship, but it wasn't yet my ship. It was still the builder's ship. So the Bath Iron Works brings out a group of operators. They're certified merchant marines, essentially certified to run engineering plants. They bring a deck crew out that's certified and licensed to drive the ship. The harbor pilot for the Kennebec River is one of
Sure.
the pilots for Portland. Is the ship's master. They hire him and he brings a team out there and he's up there on the bridge the entire couple days that we're out doing trials. And the first set of trials, we call it HM&E, or whole mechanical and electrical. It's really, does everything work? Can you support life? Can you make electricity, make water? Can you propel the ship? And so they run through all those support systems. They take the ship out and they run it at full speed. Can we go to full power? Can we run at full power and everything stays, all the readings look right? Pretty fun, doing that. And then you come back into port, and about a month later, 2 months later, maybe you go out for the combat system sea trials. It's the second round of trials. So in theory, everything is done for the whole mechanical and electrical, and now you're just looking at the combat systems, the radars, the communications, and everything else that helps us operate. And it's another series of tests to go through that whole bat. Once all that's done, the third round of tests is the acceptance trials. So the acceptance trials, they bring a team from INSERV, the Board of Inspection and Survey, and the Navy demonstrates the ship to INSERV, and as long as it passes the test, they're able to accept the ship officially. The Navy's able to sign the paperwork and transfer custody from the builder to the supervisor.
Okay.
So
exciting moment.
We had a cake and everything. We had the paperwork in the wardroom. We signed the form to transfer custody, and it's exciting because it's one step closer to being USS John Basilonne.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825. Repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.
Where, there's such a renewed focus right now on shipbuilding, from the White House to the Navy to Congress, in nonpartisan way, thankfully. Yeah. You've had this sort of unique experience of working with Bath Iron Works. There's at least 10 more DDGs that are, announced or under construction, Can you talk a little bit about how it was working with the folks at Bath and sort of being right there in the middle of that kind of situation?
Yeah, and there's actually two companies that build the DDG. So there's Bath Iron Works up in Bath, and then Huntington Ingalls down in Pascagoula. Yeah. And I've served on both Ingalls ships and Bath ships. I've never actually been to Huntington Ingalls, so it's a similar operation down there. But I really enjoyed working with the team at Bath Iron Works. And, even though I probably won't see them very much, after I take the ship and move on, but getting to know the team that built the ship, everyone from the supervisors and some of the area vice presidents down to the people who paint and weld, and, even the person that cleans up on board. And I had the benefit of my whole manager, who was a government rep. He had worked for Bath Iron Works after he got out of the Navy, and he worked there. I can't remember how many years he was there before he transitioned to government. So he knew everybody. It was awesome. So every time we were down there, he would introduce me. He's like, "Hey, this is Sarah. She works in this area. This is John. He's one of the, here's what he's involved in." And he would introduce me to these folks as we walked around, and then also what he would do is, because I'd like to recognize them for their work and try to just thank them for what they're doing. So as we were going through like aviation certification or whatever certification we needed, he would point out people who were really just kind of helping get it done, and he'd let their supervisor know, and then I would give him one of my coins.
Awesome.
And that usually made their day, because they weren't expecting that, and they didn't always get the interaction with the ship CO.
Sure.
They're like, "Oh wow, you're the captain of the ship, or you're going to be the captain." I'd chat with them for just a minute and get to know them, and it was fun. It was a neat environment being there. If you've never been up there, it's a beautiful town. Small town feel up there in Maine. But yeah, it was just I enjoyed the 2 years I had.
Yeah, I'm sure what you were just saying was so appreciated, because I know at the Battleship in Camden, we were built just down the river in Philadelphia at the Navy Yard, and we still get people who come on board and say, my grandparents or my parent or my grandmother, my grandfather. We have actually a lot of women who were part of the crew who built the Battleship, and there's such a pride in that, right? I mean, there's such a pride. You have pride in bringing the ship to life as the skipper, but the pride of the folks who are built the ship and did the painting, did the welding, and all that. So I'm sure that really meant a lot to them, for sure.
It's an important industry.
Very.
We need ships. We need shipyards to build Navy ships. We need shipyards to build our merchant ships. And just like the Navy and all the other branches of the military are trying to recruit our talent for our active duty, our enlisted and our officers, the shipyards are trying to recruit their workers and the tradesmen and women who will continue to build ships. And it's another way to serve.
Yes, it is.
And the folks who work in that industry should be very proud of what they do.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I wanted to know sort of how you reflect on the responsibility that comes with commanding a warship like an Arleigh Burke class destroyer. In today's sort of geopolitical environment, you've got many different conflicts going on all around the world. You mentioned some of your crew, served in the Red Sea, combating the Houthis and those organizations over there. Can you talk about that sort of responsibility that comes along with that, and how you sort of handled it and viewed it?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to the goals I had, the charge I had in command, where the assemble, organize, and train. And I always told my crew that the training piece is, we're training to operate at sea. When we take custody of the ship, we're sailing down the river and we're taking it to our commissioning site and to our home port. But we're also training for operations. The Navy was built to provide prompt and sustained power, for sea power, for combat at sea. And the departments, the divisions, every sailor on the ship is built around that combat organization. And so I tried to have those conversations with my crew and just keep reiterating that you might not be the person pushing a button at a console that fires a weapon system, but even my engineers keeping power and lights on enables us to fight. My supply team helped us stay sustained and ready to be able to fight, whether it was through parts and logistics or through food and services. So for me as a CO, I didn't get to take my ship on deployment, but knowing that I was trying to get a crew ready and combat ready and battle minded. And that really, it weighed on me because no one else was, it was my responsibility. I had a bunch of people to help me do it, but at the end of the day, how well the crew was ready really, really weighed on me. And that was the trust that was placed in me as a CO was to get that crew ready. So it's a huge weight. I'll tell you that the day of my change of command that afternoon, as sad as it was to move on, it was like a huge weight was lifted because, it was now like I wasn't in command anymore. The decisions didn't rest on my shoulders anymore. And I don't think I expected that feeling that same day.
Yeah. I was hoping we could shift for a second and talk about commissioning week. I had the real honor and privilege of serving on the Basilone commissioning committee. I think I was on the USS New Jersey commissioning committee for the submarine for like 4.5 years prior to our commissioning week. And I think I was on the Basilone commissioning for all of like 8 weeks or 9 weeks, I think it was. But we pulled it off, and it was really just a tremendous commissioning day and week. And of course, it happened in New York City, and I remember it was probably 3 or 4 days before I was doing one of the commissioning week activities, but seeing the pictures of the Basilone sailing into New York Harbor past the Statue of Liberty. I mean, just an incredible sight to see, an incredible, really picture perfect moment. And of course, the commissioning was next to the former ex-USS Intrepid, the retired Essex class aircraft carrier. How cool of an experience was it to bring this ship into Manhattan?
It was that was exciting. I had been there once, and I was there as a Lieutenant JG on my first destroyer for Fleet Week. 2006. So this was it was not quite 20 years later, but 18 years later, bringing the ship in and pulling in there to Pier 88. It was exciting. It was so much fun being in New York. As you know, being part of the committee, just everything around commissioning is exciting. There's a lot of energy the entire week, the activities leading up, and then certainly the day of too. But that was a pretty great feeling to that morning to get the first glimpse of New York and get our way into the traffic and start to make that transit in. And just what a perfect day. The weather was perfect pulling in that day.
Yeah, and the painting that was commissioned for the commissioning day with the ship, it was almost the same picture that I saw on Facebook a couple of days before, and it had the big 1st Marine Division battle flag flying.
Yeah.
And it was great. A few days before the commissioning, we at the Battleship hosted the crew on board for a special dinner and tours. Wanted to know what your crew thought of being on board the Battleship New Jersey.
The ones who were there loved it. They just being on a piece of history like that. I mean, for who can't love going on board one of those battleships? I remember feeling the same thing when I went to see the Battleship out in Hawaii. One of my sailors enlisted, but it was fun going out there, being able to walk around the Battleship New Jersey. For me, it was a different perspective, certainly impressive, seeing just the size of that ship. But when I walked up to the bridge, and I think I told you this when we were there about a month ago, is thinking, standing up there being like, wow, this is open water. This would be okay to drive, but that's a big ship to try to bring into port. And just very impressed at just the magnitude of it and all the people who'd been there before us. And then thinking about how the legacy of our ship, JOHN BASILONE, was carrying on that same legacy that the battleships had from their long career of service from World War II and beyond that.
Yeah. We took the ship to dry dock last year, as you know, and the art of ship handling, as you talked about during your time at the academy, was certainly in perspective all of last year, bringing 4 separate movements in and out of 3 different ports, including a dry dock. It was an interesting experience, and not an easy one to handle, especially without propulsion and engine systems, especially. So yeah. Well, we're certainly glad, and we were really honored to host the Basilone crew. I know it meant a lot to our team when we have such a complement of sailors, active sailors on board. It helps bring the ship to life, honestly. And we're certainly proud of what we did. We just hosted on board a couple of days ago the commissioning ceremony for our Rutgers University Navy ROTC. 12 new ensigns and lieutenants in the Marine Corps. And we, with the admiral who was there for the ceremony, reflected on how great the battleship looked. And then which obviously means a lot to us, and we take a lot of pride in that. And but then to step foot on your ship and get a quick tour in New York with our crew, we gave you tours, then we got your tour, and it was really cool to see what a brand spanking new Arleigh Burke class destroyer looks like. And it was just a really cool experience. So did you have any other, or did your crew have any sort of other really great events or experiences you want to mention from commissioning week?
They were just excited to see New York. Besides the trip out to the battleship, we took a group of them down to Raritan, New Jersey. Yep. So down to JOHN BASILONE's hometown. And we built a really good relationship with the town of Raritan and with the Basilone Memorial Foundation. So we try to send people down there at least every year from the parade they do in September. Yep. So it was fun to connect with our friends there. We had another big tour that went to the Statue of Liberty, I saw some amazing pictures from that day. And then I think just getting around the city and seeing everything there is to see in New York. I know they were all excited and happy to be there.
I know we sort of talked about it a little bit earlier. We talked about what it setting the standard and setting, having the opportunity to sort of shape the crew, shape the boat, and the culture. What did it mean to you to be the first skipper of a newly commissioned ship?
Oh yeah, don't mess it up. You gotta get that culture right. I try to focus on just doing the job the right way, and bringing that same mindset to the rest of the crew. It's a huge honor, to be the first CO, because my name will always be the first one on that plaque there. When the Navy has the list of ships and all the COs that have been on there, my name's going to be in the top right. And there's several other people who were pre-com COs, and being able to meet some of them over there afterwards, I started reaching out to other pre-commissioning COs. Our former Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, he was at the commissioning ceremony. He pre-commed a ship when he was in the Navy. So him and I shared some thoughts on just the excitement of pre-comming.
I loved hearing about him talking about that during his speech on commissioning day. Yeah, he was so excited all week, and I was talking to him the night before and telling him what that we had the crew on the New Jersey, and he had just presided over the submarine New Jersey's commissioning a few weeks earlier, and just some really, really cool experiences.
Well, he told me we were going to make the Barcelona commissioning the second best commissioning. And,
outside of his, I'm assuming.
Yeah. He said, and you know why it's second best? I said, yes, sir, I do. So it was fun to have him a part of it, and I was glad that you joined the commissioning committee with our chair Frank Russo over there in New York. Yeah, it was just amazing.
Any particular moments stand out to you for commissioning day that was sort of a favorite moment of yours?
You talked about the same thing with Commander Steve Halley. The JOHN BASILONE is in commission and I'm in command. Being able to turn and say that, to make that report to Admiral Caudle, our Fleet Forces commander, he was there as the CNO's rep, and yeah, I thought I was going to start crying. So I practiced it. We rehearsed it so many times. The day prior, I said it. I went through my whole script, and so I had fun. I had fun with the commissioning ceremony.
Hard not to.
I'm sure some people could probably be very rigid, but I was enjoying it. I was enjoying the entire ceremony. And I think that part, though, making that report and being like, all right, the ship is in commission now. Yeah. That was,
yeah. Well, you obviously know that's my favorite part of the commissioning ceremony.
The other part for me was that the part with the crew bringing the ship to life.
Yeah.
Where
I was just going to say that too.
The whole crew turned and pivoted at the same time, and then did that battle cry that the ship did. Right after they all came on board. That was. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I noted at commissioning day that when the order from the sponsors were given, you had great sponsors for your ship. There was a lot of Marines that also came on board at that time. Did you have Marines as part of your crew, or was that just a special thing for that day because of who JOHN BASILONE was?
Yeah, that was a special thing for that day. We've wanted to have Marines involved in the commissioning of JOHN BASILONE pretty much, since I got assigned there. And so when we knew we were going to have some Marines at the ceremony, we're bringing them, we're mixing them in with the crew. We want them to be part of it. And yes, that was very intentional. It was fun having them there.
That's great. This is the WETSU podcast. We eat this stuff up or something like that. And I understand that you told me you had a similar-ish motto on the JOHN BASILONE. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of that, what it means, and sort of, what it meant to the crew and how the crew embraced that slogan?
That's another one that goes back to right after I took command. My main propulsion assistant, Warrant Officer Steve Gass, he came to check in with me, and he said, he values, ownership and, his team caring. And I don't know that, I think he got the phrase from somewhere else, but so his last name was Gass, Gass. And he said, I want to use this phrase called HOGAS, HOGAS. And I was like, interesting. He's like, well, you've heard of like gas, the give a care. We'll say that. And I was like, yeah, but you talk about having that gas factor, and you got to care about what you do. And he said, well, he's like, what I want to call it is a high octane. So it's high octane. Give a
love that.
Care. Yeah. He brought that in as part of the engineering department. And so when we were going through our certifications, that was something I would highlight. We'd have all hands calls, and I was like, hey, our engineers out there, they've got that HOGAS. They bring it every day. And of course, they wanted me to say it out loud in the group. They were, so I'd throw the HOGAS in there when I could for them. Yeah. So when I heard about the WETSU, I was like, you know what? That's awesome. They'll be excited to hear that, because I don't think we knew that when we came and visited the battleship when we were there for the pre-commissioning party.
Yeah. Well, we launched this podcast after commissioning, and we, actually this is our battle flag, our WETSU battle flag. We actually just found a second battle flag from the Beirut campaign, but What is the importance of having these type of WETSU, HOGAS, mottos, rallying cries, whatever you want to sort of describe them as? You've served on a lot of ships, and what's the importance of sort of that rallying cry that essentially helps bring the crew together?
Yeah, it's that ownership level, and whether you're talking WETSU or whether you're talking HOGAS, it's a level of ownership. You can call it extreme ownership. But it comes down to owning everything. That at the end of the day, it's yours. The ship, the mission, the people, and you're going to do it the best way you can. And so, whether when things are good, when things are bad, like you're going to come in there and you're going to give it the best you can. I always told my folks I wanted them to know their jobs, do their jobs, and then treat everyone with respect and dignity. And so that knowing your job and doing your job, it's personified or displayed through that HOGAS or through that WETSU.
Is there any particular sort of WETSU / HOGAS moments that sort of stand out to you from time on Barcelona, or maybe just from one of your other ships that you served on?
Yeah, well, I'll say in the process of getting the ship certified to sail away is really where we saw it. And every single certification, the crew was tired, but they came in there with energy. They came in there with excitement, and they did well. And at the end of the cert, the inspection team was like, "Hey, you guys are great to work with. You're very respectful. You care about what you do." And then the next week, the next inspectors would be out there. We get done with that one. And eventually, and so from the time we moved aboard to the time we sailed away was 84 days, which was, it was a record. We weren't trying to set a record, but it was a record.
But you did anyway.
And it wasn't easy. The crew they were getting pretty tired. They were starting to get worn down, but that ownership and that care for the mission was still there, even when they were tired. And so I'd say it's not just one moment, but really that whole move aboard, sail away time period. Yeah. Seeing the JOHN BASILONE crew just dig in and get it done and do it the right way. And when the day we sailed away, that was actually some of the stuff that got talked about when we had with BCNO was out there and the supervisor of shipbuilding was there, and the supervisor actually was commenting on the Barcelona crew and said, this crew has a sense of ownership that they hadn't seen in a while, and just how well they've done with everything. So it was. Oh,
I'm sure that was so great to hear on your part. Yeah, that's great. I mentioned earlier, I met your sons a few weeks ago on the Battleship, and I asked a similar question to Steve Halley, and I'll ask it to you. How do you balance the sort of really incredible responsibility that you have, as a skipper of a newly commissioned vessel, or really any vessel there that is, to, sort of balancing that work home life and at the same time also trying to meet these sea trials, meet these certifications, check all the boxes, get this ship ready for commissioning and to enter the fleet? How do you balance the responsibilities of, your duty versus, your home life?
So that is a challenge. So I'll start with saying that it's a challenge. My wife and I have been married 16 years, and most of that time has been assigned to ships that were deployed. And, our oldest son that you met, Jacob, he just turned 14. So for pretty much, his whole life, I've been in a sea duty capacity. And what I try to do is when I'm not gone, so when I'm not out to sea or on travel somewhere, if I can, try to be there for those family events, whether it's an appointment or kids' appointments or school or helping run errands. I try to balance that. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna leave work a little bit early, on this one day. It's not every day, but trying to make sure I'm there, because when those deployments come and I'm gone for 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is, it's just the family doing it. So I've really got to be intentional to invest back into them when I'm home. But I have to be deliberate about it, because it can be easy just to stick with the work schedule and stay late, but the work's still going to be there the next day. So,
right.
So teaching myself to be like, I'm at the point, I'm at the logical stopping point for the day. That late day is going to come, but today doesn't have to be the late day. So I'm going to get there and help out the family. So I'll say it hasn't always been perfect, but there's been times it's been better. Certainly when I was at the pre-com, I was able to be home every night. So that was one nice thing about that job, is I was home every day until we moved aboard the ship, which was around the time I moved the family to Maryland. And then we kind of treated that like a deployment. So they moved down to Maryland, I moved on board the ship, and I started working longer hours because family was here and they weren't with me. And so I just kind of focused on the mission there. And then once that time was over, it's like, okay, it's time to get back home and reconnect.
Yeah. You were relieved in January after your highly successful tour, bringing the JOHN BASILONE to life. You're at the Pentagon now. Can you tell us a little bit about what your new assignment is?
Yeah, so this is my first tour in DC. And like you said, I'm on the Chief Naval Operations Staff, or OPNAV, and I work in the Surface Warfare Directorate at N96. And specifically where I'm at is I'm in the Weapons and Sensors, which is N96 Charlie, and I'm the branch head for weapons. So it sounds like a lot. What it is that we're the resource sponsor for all the weapons the Navy has. So in my portfolio, I've got all the missiles. So anything that comes off a ship, SM-2, SM-6, Standard Missile, Sea Sparrow.
Is this surface and submarine?
Specifically surface ships.
Specifically.
Yeah, so if it comes off a surface ship, it's part of my portfolio. There's another office that handles everything for submarines, and there's also an aviation branch as well. Yeah, so I've got the hard kill weapons. A Tomahawk is part of my portfolio, and then guns and ammunition. So the 5-inch gun all the way down to the 9mm. So it's pretty exciting portfolio to be in. Just resourcing what the Navy needs right now, but then also looking at what do we need in the future. What's that next weapon we want to work on. So it's a different type of work than I've ever done, but it's rewarding in its own way.
Yeah. What do you miss most about sea duty when you're ashore? And then on the opposite side of that, what don't you miss at all?
I don't miss being away from the family. So that's that part I definitely don't miss. What I do miss is I miss the sailors. I miss the officers. I miss the chief. Just the connection and tightness you get with a crew on a ship. That's the part I think I miss the most. I still get a little bit of that working with people in the Navy and then working with people who are retired. It's not the same thing. It's different. So
it's a different feeling. Yeah, certainly. And how are you enjoying? I mean, you spent most of your time at sea, at sea deployments. You're now in the heart of really everything at the Pentagon. So what's it like going from serving on these type of ship deployments to now working at really the center of the world for the military in Washington at the Pentagon?
Yeah, it's I had almost a little bit of depression, at first, because it's going from being in command of a ship to that's no longer my world for right now.
Right.
But it is it's an exciting feeling going in there and working. And there's so many people that work there. There's so much that happens there that I have no idea because it's outside of the shop I work in.
Right.
And if I wasn't intentional, I'd see ththese people, but there's so much other work happening there that it makes me feel actually very small. It's big what we're doing, but I also feel like, it's one piece of the defense industry and the department.
Yeah. Oh, it's a different feeling, I'm sure. I wanted to ask you, what advice do you have or have you given to, aspiring officers and who are aspiring to, to command their own ship one day?
Yeah. I think the biggest piece is don't give up. And, by doing that, you'll help build that resiliency you need. So when things aren't easy, if you get kicked, you fall down, get back up and keep going. And then, you decide when it's time to move on to do something else. So I think that's probably the biggest piece. Just don't give up on it. But then as you're pursuing that goal, take that ownership in it. Do your best to learn everything you can about it, and then do the right thing. Do the right thing every day.
In April, you received news that you were selected for 06, a promotion to captain. So congratulations, and
thank you.
And bravo Zulu to you. How did you hear about the news of your promotion, and when does those promotions really come into effect?
So thank you, Marshall. Yeah, I did get selected for captain. They will start promoting people in October, and it's all based on seniority. So for where I'm at on the list, I'm fairly high on the list, but they only promote like 10 people a month roughly.
Okay.
So basically I think that my promotion will probably be in April or May of next year. Just traditional, kind of history, the way that the promotion numbers go every single month. I'm guessing that I'll be a springtime promote, but I'll know that better once they put out the phasing plan. So they'll publish that later this year.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I've had three people who I knew and consider friends: you, Steve Halley, and a guy named Joe Ben, who also piloted the battleship on all the movements that we talked about.
Yeah.
He's a strategic sea lift officer. All three of you made 06, and so there must be something in the water this year.
Yeah.
So again, congratulations to you on that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anything else you want to sort of leave with that you want people to know about your time in the Navy, or about the Basilone, about your service, or anything you'd like to sort of leave our listeners with?
Well, one thing I was thinking about, and just kind of, after I was there visiting the battleship, and I brought my kids there, and serving on board, several ships now. I really appreciate and thank you for the role that you and the Battleship New Jersey Museum play on.
Thank you.
On maintaining that ship and keeping that ship there to show the American people about the Navy. Even a small piece. For me as a career sailor, it's just awe-inspiring seeing a ship like that, and hearing the stories of the sailors who served on board, and knowing what the battleships did for the U.S. Navy in wartime. So there's that piece of history and legacy that we have there, but then also connecting it to what we do nowadays. In a way, I see that as the role you all play there is it's yes, it's preserving history, but it's also inspiring that next generation of people who will either serve in uniform or serve not in uniform, by encouraging others to serve or supporting through some other means. And that's kind of the same obligation I've got on active duty, is to share my story, to share, about the sailors I've worked with, the things we've done, the things we've enjoyed, and the things we've learned, and inspiring that next generation through our stories to consider service. So that's probably the thing I would leave with, is just keep sharing that story, keep sharing the service, and inspiring young kids and old kids to support the Navy.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I appreciate that. And, a lot of us are not, I'm not a veteran. A lot of us are not veterans. We do this because we're patriots, because we love this. We love the battleship. We love the Navy. But you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that is exactly our mission. It's to make sure that people know the service and sacrifice that went into a ship like this, who served, who had 19 battle and campaign stars, and served in World War II and Vietnam, Korea, Beirut, Persian Gulf, and making sure that people understand the sacrifices that our sailors make, and also especially that their families make. And that's our core mission at the battleship. And I'm glad that it doesn't go unnoticed. So we appreciate that greatly. Commander Carne Livingston, it was a real pleasure to talk to you. We are grateful to you for your service in the Navy, to our country, to our USS JOHN BASILONE community. And most of all, we're grateful and thankful to have you here on not the HOGAS podcast, the WETSU podcast here at the Battleship New Jersey. So thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Marshall. It's great to see you again.
You too.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825. Repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.